Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us and welcome. I think this is our fifth Inform Me Talking Small Business webinar, so thank you so much for coming. Unfortunately, my co-host Will Blower can't be with us for this episode, but I'm your host today. I'm Sophie Cross. I'm the editor of Freelance magazine. I've been working with Inform Me for nearly a decade, helping them to create small business advice content. Inform Me is the small business advice charity arm of AAT, I can never say this, the Association of Accounting Technicians. And our guest today on the webinar is a business friend of mine. She's also a writer for Freelance magazine, where she has a regular column all about seeing yourself as a business when you're a freelancer or a company of one. But even though I know Anita really well, I read a lot of her business articles, obviously, and her advice, and we've met up in person. I see her LinkedIn posts every day, and I mean every day. So yeah, you're amazing at LinkedIn and improving the algorithm. But despite all of this, I'm really excited to get to ask you more questions about your business journey today, about how you run your business, because I know from the outside it looks like really inspirational, but I know that that absolutely isn't a facade at all, and you really are as smiley and happy and amazing at business, like in real life, as all of your brand communications portray. And all your marketing content is incredible, which makes sense really, because that's what you do. So official bio, you're a punchy copywriter and a director of Lexicon, which specializes in brand messaging, tone of voice and copy that grabs clients by the eyeballs. So things like LinkedIn posts, case studies, email sequences, sales proposals and website copy. So today we're going to learn all about Anita's journey of building her successful business, and we're also going to focus on how you've grown and how you continue to grow a valuable network of connections. So thank you so much for being with us today, and I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, it's amazing to be here.
Oh, thank you. So first question I'm going to start with is just if you could give us a bit of a career journey from pre running your own business, really how you got started in business and in copy. And, I don't know this really well. So yeah, please go into as much detail as possible.
Cool. So I studied languages at uni, which I suppose is where it all started for me, because I've always been interested in communication. And I often say to people now that actually copywriting is a lot like translation or interpreting, because you're kind of taking something that's quite complicated or a bit boring and actually translating it into something else. So started with languages, did French and Spanish at uni, and then I ended up working for a huge corporate company called Euromaster, and I ended up writing tenders. So I was writing, but kind of in quite a sort of corporate, sort of boring capacity. And then I was encouraged by someone in the marketing department who sort of spotted that I had a bit of a talent for writing. And they said, really think you should do your CIM, Chartered Institute of Marketing qualification. And I was like, I don't know, maybe I'll just do a little marketing course. So anyway, they persuaded me to do my CIM. So I did. I went back to college. And then just after I'd started that at college, a job popped up in the marketing department for a marketing exec. So I went for it. Had no experience in marketing, genuinely didn't think I'd get it, but I did. My manager at the time sort of saw something in me. And then I kind of moved really I worked my way up from marketing exec to e-commerce manager. So I was managing the e-commerce, the online tyre shop, because it was in the tyre industry. I was traveling, speaking a lot of French, so sort of still using my languages, but also using my comms skills and kind of, honing my marketing skills. And then when I came back after maternity leave, after I'd had my second baby, I left there to work for a really small charity, because they changed my hours and stuff. So I went to work for this very small charity, and I went from basically being in a marketing team of 25 of us, where we had agencies to do everything, to being a marketing team of one, where I had to do literally everything. I had to write the press releases, I had to write the website copy, I had to do the networking for, to raise the profile of the charity. I literally had to do every little kind of bit of marketing. So I was there for sort of 3 years, and then COVID hit, and it was just that moment. It was just a pivot. It was a chance to kind of to be brave, I suppose, and do something a bit different. I was kind of looking for a new challenge, and I just thought, oh, do you know what, I've got this opportunity. So I was sort of homeschooling in an afternoon, and in the mornings I was working on my business, setting everything up, and that was 5 years ago, and still here
Wow.
today.
Oh my gosh, so much of that resonates with me. So also did my went to work for a big corporate,
Yeah,
did a business degree, so came at it more from the sort of marketing angle in the
yeah,
first place. Yeah, also kind of got, someone kind of was saying to me, "Oh, you're good at copy, you're good at
yeah.
content," without, so it wasn't something that I necessarily went after.
No,
I mean, it's like I really love. I think it is a Steve Jobs quote, but about not being able to join the stepping stones up until you look backwards.
yes, yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, loads that resonates. And also, I always say about how the most exciting thing, like it's so scary at the time, but the most exciting things really do kind of happen when you have that blank canvas and you've
yeah,
sort of got nothing to lose.
yeah,
Um, and I think
definitely.
sometimes if you could almost get yourself in that headspace of like, what if I just don't mind what
Yeah.
happens
And I,
instead of kind of worrying about an outcome.
yeah, and I think it's really rare to have that opportunity, because you either need something like a redundancy, or like a big kind of life change to almost force you to do something like that. And I genuinely
Yeah.
think that if COVID hadn't happened, I possibly would still be where I had been, because it was such a monumental time, that it was that kind of sort of forced me to go. And I have written recently on LinkedIn about there was a bit of a toxic situation at work. There was some kind of bullying and some stuff that was going on that wasn't very nice. And actually, when COVID happened, it was that opportunity to go, I can leave this behind, because I've got this different set of circumstances. So
Mm.
yeah, I think sometimes it does take that. You have to be kind of big and bold, don't you, for those big things to happen. And the stepping stones thing, definitely, that definitely resonates, because when I look back at it, it all makes sense. That I started, and when you asked me that question, and I'm started by talking about all my languages, and then moving into writing tenders, and then into marketing. Like, it all seems really logical now, but at the time, I never would have thought that those stepping stones would have been my journey at all.
Yeah, for sure. So just to ask you a little bit more about that, I just wanted to ask actually how you felt going from like a really big company to a really small company where you had those agencies doing things before and then you were doing everything yourself. Like, I mean, yeah, how did you feel about that?
Yeah. So initially, I was terrified. I remember in my interview for the charity, them sort of saying, "Oh, you'll be expected to do this, and you'll be expected to do that," and I'm kind of nodding along and going, "Yeah, okay, yeah, that's great. I can do all of that." But I genuinely believe that whenever you're going for a new job or a new opportunity, you can only really ever do sort of 50 to 70% of the job that you're going for, because you're normally going for a more senior position, you're going for a promotion, or you're taking a step to setting up your own business. So I think, if you could do all of those things, you wouldn't be going for that position. So I just tried to kind of remind myself of that. And I also think that anybody can learn to do anything. So I sort of had that approach, and I thought, well, okay, I've never written a press release before, but I can figure out how to do it, because I can write and I can ask the right questions. So I suppose, armed with that sort of self-confidence, I suppose, I just kind of went for it. But yeah, it was a steep learning curve, because yeah, we had a PR agency when I worked at Euromaster, we had a comms agency, we had a data agency, we had an SEO and a PPC agency, and then I was literally kind of having to do all of those things. But I also think that it taught me to simplify things a little bit, because I think when you do have a big organisation, and you've got lots of agencies, the role of the marketing manager just becomes managing those agencies. Whereas when I was actually doing it, I could kind of choose what to focus on, and I was only focusing on the stuff that I knew was really going to have an impact. So I think it forces you to strip out the unnecessary stuff and to simplify things, because you are only one person.
Absolutely. I think that's really great. Like, there's a process for everything, and not
Yeah.
to age myself too much, but actually we have access to all of this now, which maybe 20 years ago you
Yeah.
couldn't just kind of jump on the internet and find out this kind of
Yeah.
best practice for writing a press release, or
Yeah.
it was kind of like you'd have to read a book
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
to learn these things,
Yeah.
and not even on a Kindle or audio.
No,
Like
an
you'd
actual
have to
book.
use your hands and
Yeah.
open a
Highlighter
book.
pen. Yeah.
So I guess doing, having to do so many different of the elements and doing things for yourself and learning how all of those processes is helpful for running your own business, right?
Definitely, yeah. I think when going from a big company where you were really, I was a really small cog, there were thousands of people in the organisation, to going to a small company, even that alone, I think was the precursor, like the preparation, I suppose, for me setting up on my own. And if you'd have said to me when I was working for the big corporate, what about setting up on your own? What about setting up as a marketing consultant or as a copywriter? I would have just gone, absolutely no way, because at that point I didn't have the network or even the knowledge of what I would need to do to set up a business, because I was just surrounded by thousands of people that kind of did all these things for you. So going to work for a very small organisation actually really helped me with that, because all of a sudden I saw how I was closer to how the business operated. I was bringing all my kind of marketing and business experience and helping the charity to think more like a business. And one of the things that one of my old managers used to say to me at Euromaster was he always talked about Anita PLC, or, if he'd been managing you, he would have talked about Sophie PLC. And he always used to say that, you do need to think of yourself as like a mini business, even when you're employed. And that kind of stuck with me. And, maybe that was one of the things that in the end, kind of a little voice in my head thinking actually I could become Anita PLC. Obviously it ended up becoming Lexicon, not Anita, but that was kind of the idea behind it. So I think having that that experience working in a very small organization, you get exposed to so many different things that it absolutely helped me and gave me the the basis for my own business. And then I think the other thing was that because I was kind of helping the charity to raise their profile, I was going out and doing a lot of networking, and then I met all of these other amazing business owners, and I started talking to them about how they did things, and I think that as well kind of gave me a bit of a boost and made me think maybe I could do this.
God, I've got I've got like so many different questions for you, and I'm going to try and like put them in an order and come back round to them. So my first one I was just going to mention, because I think it's really interesting, that kind of concept of being, basically I think of it in the context of LinkedIn, is that I didn't consider using LinkedIn until I was self-employed. Yeah. And like I wouldn't have ever considered from and I know LinkedIn traditionally always was kind of just a CV site, and that's what most people used to use it for. Yeah. But I suppose now I still feel that I see a lot of people that are employed are not using it for want of a better word, to kind of create their own personal brands.
Yeah.
And I actually think that, all of these skills, networking, being seen as an expert in your industry, sharing your thoughts on things, are just as important whether you're employed or self-employed. So, have you got some thoughts on that? Were you using LinkedIn as, when you were employed?
When I was at Euromaster, barely. It was more of a kind of a CV site. I did sort of flirt with it when I was at the charity, and I was brave once, because I organised an event which was a mothball, which, if you've never heard of it, it's an event where everybody wears their wedding dresses. So it was amazing, so you have kind of.
I haven't heard of that term. Yeah, is that what it's called?
Yeah, a mothball, because I suppose from the days of you put your wedding dress in the wardrobe and it gets mothballs, it's a bit of a play on the mothball and it being kind of a ball. And it was amazing. So we had about, I don't know, 100, 150 women all in their wedding dresses. Some people chose to wear something different. That was cool too. There was hardly any space on the dance floor, because obviously the dresses are so big. But because I was organising the event, I had to do a speech. And I don't love kind of getting up and speaking in front of lots and lots of people. And anyway, somebody videoed it, and I posted that video on LinkedIn, and kind of did a bit of post. And I think that was the first time that I sort of, tried to kind of do something that was maybe kind of a bit towards kind of personal brandish, because it was about me speaking and it was about the event that I'd organised. And obviously it was so unusual seeing someone, talking in a wedding dress, and my wedding dress still fit, which was amazing. So I think that was maybe kind of because I was brave with that and it got such a good reaction, I think that kind of started me thinking, actually, you know, maybe I can be a bit more present on here. But I think there was a definite change that when I set up my own business, I just kind of knew instinctively that I had to be all over LinkedIn. I knew that I had to be on there regularly, like consistently. And so I just accepted that was, you know, part of running your own business. And I do think it's easier when you're talking from your own voice and your own experience and your own stories. Whereas when you're employed, you perhaps feel a bit more like you've got to have the you know, the company's lens on everything. So I think that's maybe why there's such you know, a difference between people that are employed and people that aren't employed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I would sort of argue that that's probably a bit of a limiting belief that we put on
yeah,
ourselves in
yeah,
terms of, you know, I think even if you're self-employed, you tend to come to LinkedIn initially and kind of think, oh, I have to be formal or
yeah,
I have to be really careful about what I say. And the reality is that even if you're employed by someone else, they'll probably be delighted that you're putting yourself out there, and as long as you're not being unprofessional, which presumably nobody intends to be,
yeah,
that actually, you know, I don't think it would be reasonable for a company to also ask you like to stop posting about things if they were not kind of, you know, anti that company, which
yeah,
presumably no one is gonna do.
yeah.
Just to say that M Louise in the chat has put, LinkedIn is massive even when when you're not employed. As a student, it allows me to mix with professionals, so even as kind of students. And then Jenny as well has put, LinkedIn's grown so much since it started. Definitely noticed over the last 12 to 18 months, more people are actively using it to share what they're up to, which
Yeah.
you are extremely good at. We'll talk about that in a second. I'm kicking myself for not sharing stuff in the past. Here we go. So here's a question for you. Any tips for good ways to review stories from your historic CV, in particular, where the only people who knew what you did that would have been tagged may no longer be with us? Oh, okay. So
Oh, okay.
maybe like going for a general like what's, you know, how might you repurpose things from the past that, you know, you've done, your achievements or things like, do you do that? I mean, you know, this is a really good time to kind of get deep down and
Yeah.
you know, dirty with all your LinkedIn advice, because you show up, you're the most consistent person I see on there posting something every single day. So I mean, yeah, let's talk about how you kind of get all those content ideas, and if you do kind of repurpose stuff from the past.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, the first thing I would say is, do you know what? I look back on some of my old posts and I cringe. So, you know, there is this element of, we all find it kind of a bit, you know, awkward. And I think, no matter how good you are on LinkedIn, you're always going to look back on stuff and go, "Oh my gosh, did I really post that?" You know, I remember when I first set up the business, I posted a series that was like, you know, 20 like something like lockdown startup posts or something, and you know, they were such obvious kind of copywriting kind of tips and things, and I look back at them now and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, what was I thinking? But I think that it is just about kind of starting, and I think everyone's going to have that, you know, kind of cringe factor, and it does take a while to get into a rhythm. But to answer the question specifically, I think the easiest way to kind of repurpose stuff or to share things that might have happened like a long time ago is to tell it or frame it as a story. So the thing that I mentioned earlier, so it took me 5 years to kind of to come out and tell that story about how I'd basically been, you know, bullied in an organisation. It had been really toxic. I blew the whistle. There was some unethical behaviour happening. I blew the whistle, and you know, my life was awful. It was hell, you know, for kind of 6 months. And then when COVID hit, that was the thing that prompted me to kind of go, well, actually, I've got an opportunity here. I'd been furloughed. You know, I thought I could take something from this negative situation, but it's taken me 5 years to share that on LinkedIn. And you know, mainly because it would have been, you know, very obvious in the beginning what, you know, who the organisation was. I didn't want any kind of comeback, you know, from any of the, you know, the employees and the people that were there. Thankfully, all the bad apples, you know, have now gone, which is amazing and very validating. But I think, you know, that goes to show you that actually 5 years on, that story is still, you know, and that got brilliant engagement. I think I posted that last week, and you know, people are still commenting on it because it resonates. And I think if you can tell something as a story, it doesn't matter that it didn't happen last week or last month or even last year. You can still share it as a story, and just, explain, what happened and how you felt, and, and how things have changed now. People love a transformation story, this was happening then, and I was going through this, and, and now this is where I am. So, in the context of sharing some experience, you might tell a story about how, 5 years ago you were doing X, and now you're doing Y, and, the similarities between those two things, or the complete opposites between those two things, and how you never thought that you might be doing what you're doing now. But I think, anything that you want to kind of repurpose or reuse, I think it's all really valuable stuff, because it helps people get to know you as well. So yeah, framing as a story, I'd say, would be the route with that one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant advice.
And the other thing I was going to say, so this is a bit of a sort of a framework that I've kind of been developing in terms of knowing. Sophie, you're asking, how do you know kind of what to post? And I've sort of developed this framework, which I'm calling the Savvy framework, which was sort of inspired by watching Pirates of the Caribbean with my son, because Jack, I've forgotten his name now. What's the Jack Sparrow? That's it. Yeah. He always says Savvy. And anyway, but the idea behind it is that most of my content falls into these 5 kind of, pillars is a bit of a, naff word to use, bit of a marketing speak, but you kind of need
buckets.
To be hitting.
You probably need a bucket as well.
Yeah, buckets. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, buckets. 5 sort of buckets. I feel like you kind of need to be hitting these little sort of buckets of content. So the S is for sales. So you do kind of need to be sharing something a little bit, that actually positions, what you do from a sales perspective. So that could be a testimonial, or it could be a case study. It doesn't have to be overtly, I'm selling this thing, but something that has got a bit of a sales sort of angle to it. The A is for about. So you've got to share something about what you do. We all assume, and I'm guilty of this as well, I assume that people know what services I offer and what I do for people. And actually they don't always. The first V is for visibility. So this goes back to your point, Sophie, about, sort of sometimes doing something a bit bold, because it's the bold stuff that gets you, that helps you be visible. I know you were bold and you did your, you did a talk for the marketing meetup, but that, gave you a lot of visibility. I was bold in sharing a story about something that had happened when my daughter was born in hospital, and that post went viral. And no, it didn't get me any leads, but it gave me some visibility. And then the second V is for value. So, adding value, doesn't have to be loads, but, sharing stuff that is actually going to help other people. And then the Y in Savvy is you. And I think that's almost the most important one, is to share things about you personally, because, it's such a cliche, but people buy from people, and people are nosy as well. They want to know about you and who you are and what you stand for and all that kind of juicy stuff. So yeah, if that helps, that's a bit of a framework.
Love a framework.
Working on sort of formalising it a little bit so I can actually send it out. But I thought it might be useful.
And then that's more content to share.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I've written that down. So, yeah. And I think, just coming back to Jenny's question a little bit, that it's good, it doesn't have to be, the anniversary of the day that you left the company or something, but actually there might be a reason that you've gone for a walk in the morning and something's popped into your head. And I do think kind of, instead of just it just doesn't work really to kind of churn something out again, or to look at a post that you posted 5 years and repost it.
Yeah.
And I think that if it is popping into your head for some reason, like presumably that kind of toxic work story, rose up in you for some reason. And in that way, you can kind of authentically tell that story and kind of, make the decision if it is that right time for you or not. So I think that it is nice to kind of link it back. And whether that is, because something has happened today or recently that's kind of reminded you of it, but also it could be because, just because it's popped into your head for some reason and you've then decided to kind of reframe it in a different way. So I think that absolutely you can repurpose things if they're relevant and if it feels right, and you'll probably know whether it feels right or not.
Yeah, and
Um,
definitely there's some, if you've had a conversation with somebody about something and it's prompted that thought, that might act almost like as a little bit of an anchor. Or in this case, I think it was realizing that it had been 5 years since I sort of handed my handed my notice in. So it could be a date or something like that as well. That can kind of anchor the story a little bit, give it a bit of context.
and actually, if you're talking to other people about things, or even over email or text message, actually kind of thinking about how you've been speaking about that naturally in
Yeah,
conversation and the points that you've been making, I think that's a really good way to kind of make sure that then becomes natural on LinkedIn, or
yeah,
you're actually like making it interesting for the audience on LinkedIn, and you're not going into like LinkedIn mode.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
oh, that's brilliant! Thank you so much for that advice. Probably go back to like 10 questions that I had from something you said 20 minutes ago. So something I was going to ask you was, we talked a bit about kind of having to do everything yourself in business, and you obviously having those skills from working for a smaller business, so having those direct skills to kind of deliver the copy or deliver the press release. But you also really strike me as someone who's puts really good boundaries in place for your business. So I wanted to, I don't know what the question is here, but I just think that you don't strike me as someone who, does end up kind of running around like a headless chicken and doing something. You've already talked quite a lot about actually, even in that smaller business, having to have quite a lot of focus. So could you tell me a bit about how you kind of set those boundaries for yourself in your business, and what your kind of where your focus lies, and if that's evolved over the kind of 5 years that you've been working for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I think it helped that I worked for, kind of a corporate and an organisation for so long, because I think I was used to going into an office 9 to 5. I was used to kind of working very sort of set hours, and I'm quite a sort of a structured person. So I think from the beginning, I decided that I didn't want to work evenings and weekends. And I decided that I only wanted to work 4 days. So I had been working 3 days a week, sort of after maternity leave, and I was, thinking, well, I probably need to do 4 to be able to kind of cover client work and be available. But I definitely wanted to have at least 1 day for me. So I sort of decided that from the beginning, and I think it's almost easier when you do make that decision, because then there's no kind of scope creep. So on a Friday, which is my day off, I don't actually log on to my laptop, and I don't have my work emails on my phone. And I think that makes a huge difference for me, because if I did have them on my phone, I think the temptation to just kind of quickly check something and then kind of get dragged into work would be too strong. So the fact that I'm not even around that kind of stuff, and I actively create stuff that I'm going to do on a Friday. So I have a piano lesson, and I go swimming, or I meet a friend for coffee or something. So I'm kind of taking myself out of my my office zone, even the house, where I might be kind of dragged into work. So I think that's kind of really helped. And I'm also quite sort of strict with my working hours. So partly because of childcare, the kids are, I have to do the school pickup on a Tuesday and Wednesday and a Thursday. But then my parents have them on a Monday and a Tuesday, which means I've got a bit of a longer day. So I've sort of structured my week partly around the childcare and partly around then my day off. So I probably do about 28 to 30 hours a week, I would say. Obviously there are times where I might have to go to London for a client meeting, and so I might get back a little bit late. I'm not a saint. I'm not, it's not kind of so rigid that I can't sort of colour over the lines a little bit. But I am quite sort of disciplined with it, and I think that sort of helps really. And then I schedule all of my work, so that's the only way that I can make sure everything's done. So my retainer clients that I have, they have their days kind of blocked out in my diary, and then my project work is kind of it's all blocked out in my diary. So I'm working on this project now, I'm working on this project. I've also more recently learned that I am way more productive in the morning. I don't know quite how it's taken me so long to kind of figure that out, but if I can do a really big chunky piece of work in the morning, and then I have my lunch at 12, I feel like I feel like I've achieved something massive, and then the other stuff, it's a bit like the sand and the rocks analogy. I quite like that analogy. You know, if you put the sand in first, you're in a jar, you'll never you'll never be able to get the big rocks in. But if you put the big rocks in first, you can fit all the little stones and the little bits of sand around it. And that's kind of how I approach my work. So I try and, get the meaty stuff out of the way in the morning. But then I also schedule my own business development stuff. So I schedule, my LinkedIn posts. There was an article I think that you wrote in Freelance, Sophie, where you interviewed, is it Adam Faulkner? And he talked about the fact that he had like a 2-hour slot where we wrote all of the LinkedIn content for the following week. And I read that article and I was like, I love that. And I've done that ever since. And that really works for me.
Yeah, I really felt like Adam had a real good sort of secret sauce. That was one of, I'd say that the way you do it, how consistent you are, your framework. Adam was kind of saying he was so consistent as well, from kind of like he would log on at 8 a.m. every day. So he would kind of write it on a Friday, maybe post it, and then kind of be there for an hour.
Yeah.
And that was just his routine. Gus had a really good tip when he came on this webinar couple of months ago. And he said that he keeps like a LinkedIn journal.
Okay.
So he'll like jot down, things that he might be doing during the week that will then kind of make really good content. I thought that was really good. And I also heard Jess Bruno talk a little, like at Creator Day in Hull in May, and she said about how she's built her business based on 30 like an average of 30 likes per post, and that just really hit back home to me about just showing up. And also that kind of, what are you expecting people to do when they see your post? Like they're going to see it, they might comment, they're kind of unlikely to go through to your profile and click on your website. But some very occasionally people will do that. But you've just got to keep showing up for them to do that. And actually, I think those viral posts, where they might not be useful in that instant, you're kind of thinking, oh my God, I've got 1,000 likes or 5,000 likes. How have I not got any clients from this? And actually, you end up getting, in my experience, a lot of crap and wasting a day or two because you're just refreshing it, going, oh my God, there's another 100 likes. And that's basically what going viral does.
It's better. It's like overrated, isn't it? Going viral. Absolutely.
But you will get that kind of visibility. And I think, if you're consistently posting, like on LinkedIn, your posts are popping up a week later, 2 weeks later, people are seeing them, they're commenting them, they're coming back up. So if you can kind of that, I want to say like incremental gains, or if you're consistent with it, you're going to get so much more benefit overall, aren't you, from the benefits? So
definitely. And I think it's probably a bit of a red herring that that you can just do a post, and even with a strong call to action, that people will then message you. And I've tried before, because I saw people doing DM me this word, DM me cookie, to ask me about whatever it is that you posted about. And you see people doing it, and you kind of go, oh well, if everyone's doing it, maybe this stuff works. But that's never worked for me. But I have had some really amazing leads from LinkedIn, as a whole. And my favourite, if I've got time to tell this story, is there was a chap who basically, so I got an email out of the blue, and the title of the email was, I want to hire you. And then there was some in the email. He said, I love your LinkedIn post. I love your LinkedIn profile. I'd really like to work with you. I'm about to go off on holiday, but I'm just sending this as a prompt that, I need to kind of pick up with you when I get back. And I was just like, nah.
Right.
Exactly. That is exactly what I thought. I was like, that does not happen. There's no way that could be real. People don't do this kind of stuff. What is this? Is this a joke? Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we had some, conversations going back and forth on email, and, had a call with him and met him, and it was all absolutely true. And he's turned into now my best client. They've just renewed for another year. He's just referred me to another amazing client in London for a big tone of voice, a messaging project. And that came from, LinkedIn. So yes, I might have only ever had one of those emails, in the 5 years that I've been posting, but my goodness, the value of that. And that is because I was posting, or do post, consistently. And like you said, it is just about kind of showing up, and people sort of seeing you and getting a feel for how you write and how you are as a person and what you're like to do business with, and all of those little things that you kind of pick up on. So yeah, that's my, kind of favorite LinkedIn story, because it's actual proof that stuff, does happen, even though in the beginning I was just like, no way can this be true, and it was, and and this guy's amazing, and he's a really lovely client on top of everything else, which just makes the cherry on the cake, really.
Yeah, and I've seen you post about that, definitely, kind of giving people a bit of client envy, but also kind of setting that benchmark for what that
Yeah,
kind of client relationship can be like. And, it's almost more powerful than a testimonial in a
yeah,
way, you sharing that journey with your client, and other people coming on and going, oh, well, I'd like to work with someone and have that
yeah,
relationship. And,
yeah,
I guess that even if you're not, and I know you do share things that are, personal. I guess everyone has their own kind of boundaries, whether they want to share
cool,
anything personal
yeah,
or, different things. And, I think you personally, for me, you get that really, you get that really right in terms of people being able to really know a bit about your
yeah,
personality and what it might be like to work with you, and kind of know if you're their sort of person or not. And actually, often if you've got to choose between a copywriter or between copywriters, you might kind of think, well, actually, if this person likes the same band as me,
yeah,
or likes going mountain biking, or likes going wild swimming, like that is going to resonate with you more than someone going, oh, well, this is how I deliver my service, or
yeah,
this is what software I use. So
yeah,
yeah, I think it's really smart to kind of
yeah.
share
It is.
some personal bits as well.
It's the kind of thing that we do naturally in conversation. When you meet someone, you share stuff about yourself. You might talk about the course that you did at uni, or one of your hobbies, and then in that conversation you tend to find somehow, through some kind of questions and curiosity, there'll be like a bit of common ground, and that's the thing that you go, oh, this person is my kind of person. I met somebody last week, and she'd done she was quite a bit younger than me, but she'd done French at uni, and so straight away that was like the common ground, and that might be something that I would share in a LinkedIn post, because then other people that also did languages at uni, you kind of feel like you've got that thing in common straight away, and that you're sort of maybe cut from the same cloth, and you then think, oh, well, we probably all had a year abroad together, and then that's a kind of something that you've got in common. So yeah, I think
Mm.
it is really important to share that stuff, that people can then kind of sort of hook onto.
I think that's such good advice as well, because I often hear the question of kind of like, where should, how should I know where those boundaries should be? And it's kind of like, if you were meeting the sort of people that you
Yeah,
want to be networking on LinkedIn in
in
real
real
life,
life. Yeah,
what sort of things would you be comfortable talking
yeah,
about? And,
yeah,
I have that question, I've had that question as well about tagging people.
yeah,
And my aunt, like, should I be tagging people? And I've said to them, imagine you were at kind of like a business dinner and you were telling the person next to you a story,
yeah,
and someone who was also there, you mentioned in the story, then you would kind of be like, oh, Dave,
yeah,
we're just talking about
yeah,
you.
yeah,
And that, like, tag them,
yeah,
but don't like tag everyone in the room unless you would be like doing that,
yeah,
at the party. So I think, like, if it would feel good in real life, then do it,
yeah,
in the post. So,
yeah,
um, what this might be a good time to kind of really go a bit more into networking, like beyond LinkedIn as well. And I'm going to go right back to the beginning and ask you where you got your first clients from when you started out on your own.
yeah. So my first client was a pro bono. So it was somebody that I'd met networking when I was networking for the charity, and he'd mentioned that he struggled to get his ideas out of his head kind of onto paper, and I'd sort of stored that in my brain somewhere. And when I decided to sort of go out on my own, I thought maybe I could just reach out to him and say, do you know what, I'm doing that, I'm doing this thing, I'm sort of setting up as a copywriter, how about I sort of help you with that, in exchange for a testimonial, because I knew how important that kind of social proof would be very early on. So, I was really kind of nervous about reaching out to him, and he was like, yeah, of course. So we sort of did a bit of an exchange. So he was technically my first client. And then, it was really interesting. So I'd had a career coach before, when I was, kind of going through all the sort of the tough time and working out what I wanted to do. And my career coach had actually said to me that when she set up on her own, although it sounds so blindingly obvious, actually, if you just tell people what you're doing, people will be like, oh, I need that thing, or that I know someone that needs that thing. And so that's what I did. So I got in touch with a couple of design agencies that I'd met through my work at the charity, and I just told them what I was doing, partly as oh, by the way, I'm leaving the charity, just wanted to let you know, and I'm doing this thing. So it wasn't with any kind of sales pitch in mind. And both of them, one of them said, oh, we desperately need our website to be rewritten. Would you write it for us? And I was like, yes, of course. And then the other one said, well, we often have need for a copywriter, but we don't have one in house. So if we've got, if we have some clients, we'll get in touch. And they did. And so that's kind of where it started, really, from, a couple of agencies, a little bit of pro bono work. And then one of my close friends had also set up a business and they needed help with their marketing. So I started working for them as well. And then all of a sudden I had, 3 or 4 clients. And then it just grew from there with referrals, really, and LinkedIn and networking.
This is kind of I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I am in a way. It's also a bit of an asking for a friend question.
Yeah.
Do you think now you could be doing more of that kind of direct activity? Like, obviously you can't go out to people and say, I've just set up, or this is what I'm going to be doing. But do you think you could, do you still do that? Do you still kind of do direct emails or cold outreach or kind of warm outreach to, you've obviously now got a much bigger network than when you started 5 years ago. So do you think, I sometimes think that actually, but it's really scary at first to kind of post on LinkedIn. And when you get into that habit, that almost becomes a little bit of your safe space.
Yeah.
And you maybe things like the things that work for you initially and that things that, telling people what you're doing or asking for more work. Do you do that? Is that part of your activity?
Probably not as much as it should be. So I did do a little campaign a while ago. I found this place that sells these chocolate jigsaws, and so I had this idea that I could take a piece out of the chocolate jigsaw and then send the rest of it to someone, and I did like a letter that was like, am I the missing piece kind of thing, because there was a client that I'd done some work for in the beginning, and I kind of wanted to get back in with them. It didn't work, unfortunately. But because I think they've got somebody internally doing their marketing now. But yeah, so I have done it occasionally, but I'd say occasionally rather than it's kind of part of my thing. I mean, I suppose I think you're always networking. So even when I'm on holiday, I always ask people about what they do because I'm genuinely interested. I love finding out what people do for a job. I just, I think it's such a big part of who we are. So I'm really interested about it. And I actually ended up picking up a client in a swimming pool because we were chatting in the pool and our kids were playing together. And then, we ended up going to the same zip wire thing like the next day. And so we were chatting some more. And we'd obviously had a brief conversation about what we each did. And then I think we'd connected on LinkedIn, and then she'd emailed me or, messaged me a few months later saying, oh, I think you might be able to help because my boss needs some help with his messaging. And I think that's what you do, is it? And then they became a client. So I suppose you're naturally doing it when you're having those conversations, when you meet somebody for the first time, or if you go to a party and you chat to someone. Not that, I'm not that boring that I just talk about work all the time, but, naturally those conversations come up. So I suppose in an indirect way, I'm kind of always sort of talking, telling people about what I do. But not necessarily intentionally, maybe.
That's really good advice. And I think it's kind of, we're sort of told to have this elevator pitch, but really you don't want to have an elevator pitch, do you?
No.
But you do not want to be the person that goes, oh, I'm just a writer, and then doesn't talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
And I was at a conference this week and I kind of really noticed that I was so much more confident about saying what I did and going, yeah, I do this, instead of going, oh, I just do this and let's talk about something else. And I just think that, maybe not having your elevator pitch, but just making sure that you are kind of being your own biggest fan a little bit, or really explaining to people clearly, that's what you do for a living, is explain clearly what things are. So being able to explain clearly and, use those words like, I help people with their messaging.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And
so that if stuff does come up, and obviously they wanted to work with you because they liked you as a person. So,
yeah, yeah, for sure. But I think it's also about like dropping those little stories in, and I've mentioned storytelling earlier, but I think that's the easiest way to tell someone about what you do without overtly telling someone about telling someone what you do, and without it feeling like a bit like an elevator pitch, because you can say, I had this client and they were really amazing, and I did, and you might not be talking about necessarily the thing that you've done, but all of a sudden that then leads into a conversation and kind of framing it as a story. And I think I tell stories quite naturally, like I've always done it. When I was little, I used to submit poems and stories to our local newspaper, to try and get a little squirrel's patch, it was called. So I think I am a natural storyteller, but I think storytelling is something that we can all do because the thing has happened to you. And so, even just telling a story about something, it just plants a seed that, that you're a writer and that you have clients, and that, without it feeling like an overt sort of sell or an elevator pitch, like you say.
yeah, and I think it's like people work with people they like,
Yeah.
but they also get a sense. I think you can really easily get a sense of um, what someone will be like to work with,
Yeah.
and if they're going to be professional, and if they're going to deliver.
Yeah.
And I actually think that comes from things like consistently posting on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Like it's a bit like, I don't know if this is the best way to explain it. It's a bit like seeing if the bathrooms are clean at a restaurant. It's
Yeah.
like if you're
Yeah.
looking after those parts of your
Yeah.
business, and actually as a copywriter, or as someone who's working in business or with other businesses, to share your business knowledge or to share how you write,
Yeah.
is really really a smart thing to do, and you can show up and do that every day. Or you've got your newsletter as well, so
Yeah.
might be a good time to tell us about your newsletter.
Yeah.
How often does it go out?
So it's weekly.
Okay.
So it took me a while to kind of get to that point. I definitely, when I started, I was like, oh, I feel like I should be doing it. I'll do a monthly one, and it kind of, I think the problem with only doing it monthly was that I'd have it scheduled in my diary, and then something else would kind of come up and I'd be like, oh, I'll do it next week, or and then next week would become next month, and then all of a sudden a few months had gone by and I hadn't written one, and then I got to the point where I was like, well, I can't possibly send one now because it's been 3 months since I wrote one and people will notice, and you get inside your own head, don't you? So I tried to launch it, then sort of stopped again, then kind of relaunched it, and then realised that actually the monthly frequency wasn't working for me because it was just too long between each newsletter. So I thought that ironically doing it more frequently, and it was I was inspired by Katie Skelton, who's like an email marketing specialist, and she actually emails her list every day, and I was like, wow, that is commitment.
It's Seth Godin-esque.
Yeah, but she
What's her
specialises in
name?
email
Sorry,
marketing. Katie
Katie.
Skelton. But she does specialise in email marketing, so I guess for her that makes sense because that's the thing that she's selling. And I was like, I can't do daily, but I thought maybe I could do weekly. And because I don't work on a Friday, I don't post on LinkedIn on a Friday because I don't want to feel like I've got to, get on there and I always go on at the point that my post is going out, even though it's scheduled. I always go on and I interact and, reply to the comments and stuff. And I didn't want to be doing that on my day off. So I thought, I could send my email on a Friday. It doesn't necessarily need the same intensity of responses. So that feels like I've got my LinkedIn post going out Monday to Thursday and then my email on a Friday, which feels like quite a nice sort of balance. So, and then I was, in terms of what to write about, again, I was kind of like, what's going to be different? Because there are so many newsletters out there. And as a confession, I don't really read other people's newsletters. So I really struggled with that because, you talked earlier, Sophie, about limiting beliefs. I think that was one of mine. It was, well, because I don't really read newsletters, no one else is going to read my newsletter, but I'm not everybody else. And sometimes when you see things through your own lens, it stops you kind of doing something. So I thought for ages about what could I do that would be different. I wanted it to be short because I selfishly wanted it to be easy for me to write. And then I was reading Atomic Habits at the time and kind of came up with this idea that actually, these tiny incremental improvements that, that you can make, that actually if I told a story every week of something that I was doing to improve my marketing or my business, or, you know, so it's not necessarily about copywriting. I didn't want it to be a newsletter which was full of copywriting tips and
No,
things
I
like
also
that.
think sometimes if someone wants a copywriter, they don't want copywriting tips. They want you to do their copywriting for
Exactly.
them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, exactly right. So I thought, well, I'll share a story each week. And you know, and then that might just inspire other people to, you know, to share theirs. So it's called the Marketing Mouthful because it
I've
is
put the
just
link in the chat actually.
thank you. It's just a bite-sized, you know, bit of kind of marketing advice, and it's a story. And you know, sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're, you know, they're always very honest. And because it's a story, it's quite easy for me to write because it's something that's genuinely happened to me. So again, you know, it's allowing me to share. I mean, I am quite an open person. You know, you talked earlier about, you know, not everybody wants to share really personal things about themselves. I am quite an open book, and I do share quite a lot in person as well as online, you know, because I'm comfortable doing that. But, you know, because it's a story, it means I can share little insights into my life, but also kind of tell a bit of a story about marketing as well. And that seems to resonate. And I genuinely enjoy writing them. And, you know, when people reply to me, that's like, makes me smile so much because, you know, they've taken the time to actually reply and said how much they, you know, enjoyed reading it, which just, yeah, makes me so happy.
I love the fact it struck me earlier as well when you're talking about boundaries that you're kind of tweaking and testing, and actually when you're talking about putting something in place, for instance, a boundary, you're not just saying, okay, I'm not going to work Fridays.
Yeah.
You're putting practical things in place
Yeah.
which, you know, allow you
That's
to do that. I
important.
think sometimes we're really good at kind of going, right, I'm going to do this. And that's kind of back to the Atomic Habits thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of kind of putting things in place that support those things and not just
Yeah.
thinking it's down to pure willpower.
Yeah.
Because actually, if you say you're not going to use your phone and you have your phone next to you,
Yeah.
then you're probably going to use your phone.
Yeah.
But
Right.
yeah, Felix put in the chat earlier as well. I'm the same way. I always thought I was a night owl, but actually I'm most productive between 9 and 1. And you know,
Yeah.
you said about kind of you don't know how it took you so long to work that
Yeah.
out, but I think, you know, I'm the same. And you know, I think sometimes we you know, for some reason we've ended up not being able to sleep and working at 10 o'clock at night and then going and getting loads done and thinking, oh,
Yeah.
maybe I'm a 10 o'clock at night person.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, I feel the same about the kind of morning thing.
Yeah.
And actually to the point that I overthink constantly, well, should I be like going for a run with all this energy, or should I be doing client work, or should I be
Yeah.
doing magazine work, or should I be doing strategy, or should I be doing creative work? Because like I feel really good during that time.
Yeah.
So yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. And I think as a see this chronic overthinkers unite. Yes, amen to that.
I think as well
Yeah,
the you know, going back to the kind of the work thing that you know, because I was often guilty of, I'd be invited to a networking thing in the morning and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'll do that networking thing. And then I'd get back from the networking thing at about 10:30. And then I'd be like, oh, I'm hungry, need a bit of a snack. And then before I actually sit down to work, it's 11 o'clock. Well, I pretty much like have my lunch at sort of 12 o'clock. I've sort of, I don't know, it's just kind of embedded in me. And so then that's not really any time to do any work. So actually, you know, going back to what you said about boundaries, I've actually had to start saying no to, you know, networking and things that fall in the morning, because I've realized that it robs me not just of the time that I'm at networking, but it pretty much robs my whole morning. And then
yeah,
because I'm then starting work after lunch, and in my head I think I'm aware that I haven't done any work yet, it almost, you know, has a compounding effect that then I'm not as productive in the afternoon, even though I might have a big chunk of time to do something. So I think, you know, that those psychological little things, that the things that we do, the psychological impact of those, I think sometimes you have to sort of tune into those a little bit and
yeah, like the
realize.
fear of missing out on the networking, but actually, yeah, I totally agree. And also, like, you're kind of a bit knackered from the networking and your
Yeah.
head's going somewhere else.
Yeah.
And yeah, then that kind of cycle of, oh, but I haven't done anything yet.
Yeah.
Oh God,
Yeah.
like panic mode. And I also feel like, so I don't have kids, I don't have the school run and things like that, but I've spoken to a lot of people that do that kind of like, actually, it made me, you know, that kind of back time boundary
Yeah.
made me more productive. And I find if I've got an hour or 2 hours to do something,
Yeah.
yeah, I was kind of working from a hotel reception a couple of months ago. Like, well, I was staying somewhere else, and I kind of went there for 2 hours in the morning, went away, had lunch, and had a walk. Went there for 2 hours in the afternoon. And I thought, I think I've broken the system. Like, if I could work like this the whole
Yeah.
time and not also have those other distractions around me of
Yeah.
like putting some washing on or something.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I'm a big believer in the Parkinson's law. You know, the fact that your task expands to fill the time that you allow. I think
for
that
sure.
I generally, you know, sort of live my work life by that.
I like to have a timer as well.
Yeah,
Sometimes just to put like a 20-minute timer on and then
yeah,
realise actually that took you 7 minutes to
yeah.
do that. So stop procrastinating and just get on with some more things. Um, I have a question. It's definitely related back, but it's like again just something I really want to ask you.
Yeah.
Your imagery is always on point. So do you have a lot of professional images? Like it feels like I know that they're not all professional, but like there's so much consistency still when it's like your iPhoneography. What's your
I love that.
yeah,
I'm
tell
a
me your
photographer.
strategy and secrets. I'm sure you've got like, is your wardrobe the same color as well? Like,
I'm wearing it today. Look, I'm
yeah.
all on colour.
Have you got clothes that are other colors?
I do
I
have
don't.
clothes.
That's not something I think like. Oh, does Anita only wear that? But I just feel like there's always so much consistency.
Yeah, so I've got
There was definitely like a red holiday dress, wasn't
yeah,
there? And you're like,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, so I suppose I should explain this by saying that so one of the reasons that I chose this colour for my branding is well, there's two reasons. One is because I have synesthesia, which means that I see words in colours, and the words that begin with L and M are like a kind of a reddy orange for me. So it was almost a no-brainer that it kind of had to be those colours. But also,
So
it's one of my favourite colours. So a lot of the red clothes that I had before I, you know, kind of set up Lexicon, and so it was that way around. It's not that my branding is red and therefore I've gone out and bought a load of red clothes. It's just that I genuinely loved that colour, and so that's probably like reflected quite a bit in my wardrobe. But yeah, I mean, when people tease me for dressing on brand, I actually got to take it as a compliment, I suppose, because it means that consistency is kind of getting out there, and that kind of colour drenching. But yeah, I've got about 300 images from like a professional brand shoot that I had done a few years ago.
Wow.
And the
I thought you were going to
photographer,
say 300 red dresses.
no. Maybe 3 red dresses. But the photographer was brilliant because she sort of encouraged me to think about what I was going to be wearing, and she was brilliant at making sure that there was a pop of colour in every photo. So even if it was just my, you know, you can see my question mark behind me, like I've got a load of punctuation marks. Or whether it was something that I was wearing, or whether it was even something. I think there might be some photos where there's like a bit of red in the background, or she's like placed a red cup or something. So she was really good at making sure that there was a pop of my colour in every single photo, regardless of what I was wearing, and I think that really helped. But then, yeah, obviously when I'm on holiday or like I'm out and about, sometimes, I am that annoying person. I'll either be taking pictures of good copy, or I'm saying to my husband, oh, this might make a good photo for LinkedIn. Can you just take a picture of me in front of this red door that we found in Paris? Yeah,
I need to be that person.
I do that. And I try to, every now and again, because sometimes I think, oh gosh, are people getting bored of my my professional brand images? So yeah, I try to kind of, add some in where I can, but it's genuinely because I love wearing that colour rather than because I'm trying to be really, I don't know what the word is, but
yeah, I've started to wear a Freelance magazine hoodie. I'm like, this is the way forward, like to events.
yeah,
I'm like, this is the way forward.
yeah,
Like, have a uniform, but then also people recognize you. I think,
absolutely.
it's like if lots of people from online, then it's so much easier to be kind of recognizable. And
it's
obviously,
easy for people to come up to you as well. People would come up to you and be like, oh, Sophie from Freelancer. So it almost reduces the barriers a little bit because it makes them feel like they can approach you.
I feel like at Atomicon, I've never seen so many people with like different color hair, like really crazy color hair, almost to the point where it's becoming more the norm.
Yeah.
But like, I think that's another great thing. It's so distinguishable that like, oh, like, Nikki's got blue hair or something. But Justin's asked about privacy policies. What I was going to say is, please, I'm going to put our link, Anita and my LinkedIn's in the chat now, and please connect. And Justin, if you want to, has that worked? Sometimes my links don't work. I'm going to do them individually so they're clickable. And they're not clickable. But yeah, DM me about that, and I'll find out exactly kind of what you need it for, and point you in the direction for some good templates. It's 1 minute to 1, believe it or not.
Where's that time gone?
I know, they're clickable now, so please do, connect with us. Check out Anita's if you haven't, you don't already sort of follow her on LinkedIn. Go and like see all of the things we've been talking about. Go and see the imagery and the copy and the storytelling, and I'm sure she'd be delighted if you connected with her. And
feel free to ask me questions as well. If you want to send me a DM to like ask me something specific about something that I've spoken about today, or there was something that we didn't cover that you wanted to know, like just message me.
Thank you so much. I always say this, but this probably has been the world record for me of the quickest hour of my life. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you to the second V in savvy, please, Anita. Emma's just asked. Value.
Visibility and value.
Thank you so much. Drop us any DMs, drop us any questions, connect with us. And thank you to everyone who's come along and watched it live, or if you're watching for the catch up, thank you too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.